Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, and in this short video I'm going to be looking at things you have to think about when you want to make bigger prints. Now, what do I mean bigger prints? Most people, when they start off doing photographic printing, they may print relatively small images like this card or up to A4 or something like that, and that's fine for your prints, but at a certain point people think, I want to print bigger. Now that usually means getting a different printer that will support different sizes. I've looked recently at various printers from Epson and Canon. So the P900, for example, from Epson prints up to 17-inch width, and as long as you like on roll paper. So that's quite big. The other printers I've looked at, the Pro 200 and 300 from Canon and the Pro P700 from Epson, are all 13-inch width. So they will print up to a maximum of 13 by 9, although they will A3 plus as it's sometimes known. Now those printers will print longer prints as well, so you can have panoramics, but they tend to be quite small, narrow prints. So more typical of a print you might make on one of those would be something like that. Not a small print, but not that big, not in the scale of things. Why big prints? Well, the obvious thing is big prints impress people. You show somebody a nice big print like this and they tend to step back, they look at it, and it gets received and viewed differently to smaller prints. Now this change comes about even if you go from A4 size up to A3, A3 plus, certainly if you go up to A2. So for example, I take a picture here, printed at A2. Some aspens in Colorado. Lots of detail in it, works well as a big print. Now, although big impresses people, there are certain things you have to consider when in preparing your images for making bigger prints. Almost certainly, whereas for small prints you may have got away with minor tweaking of brightness, colour, a few other bits and pieces. Not much work necessarily to make a small print, certainly not from a modern digital camera. For larger prints, the larger the print you make, the more work you have to put into editing, because it makes a difference. Also, a print this size, and certainly a larger one, shows lens problems. So chromatic aberration, fall off in detail towards the edge. Things that you wouldn't notice with smaller prints, you notice with bigger prints. We do actually look at prints differently as well. When I look at a print the size of this card, I'm looking at it relatively close, and my perception of space of the picture is different to if I'm looking at a picture this size at a more reasonable distance, because of the distance between your eyes and how you perceive depth and lots of other things as well. But it does mean that we do perceive prints differently at this size than this size. We tend to stand further back for these ones. Now, I mentioned lens problems. Well, that's fair enough. You do get issues like that. You can correct a lot of that these days, and I've got lots of articles about how to make big prints. We've got one here. This was actually taken in 2004 on an 11 megapixel Canon 1DS. I've printed this one at 60-inch by 40-inch. That's huge, and it is indeed impressive at that size. You can see some of the detail here. I can get it a bit closer, but you're seeing it on a screen. You're not seeing it as a print, which is different, and you do have to allow for that when you're showing your work. But for this example here, I will probably have, in processing this in Photoshop, I will probably have removed maybe a pebble or two that got in the way, and then just drew your attention to it. You wouldn't notice it in a small print. In a big print you do. So think about detail, because I know certainly that in photographing in the streets, things like chewing gum, cigarette ends, anything that's, you spot litter much bigger. It's much more obvious, I should say, when you've got to print this big than when you've got to print that size. And it can distract, because we see things differently when we're looking at big prints. Now, also, this was an issue in this because it was an old camera. Processing needs to be a bit more careful because of noise in the picture. Noise can appear almost anywhere, certainly in darker areas, either around here or in the skies, and that's dependent on sharpening and other things. So that comes down to needing to edit your pictures slightly differently. As I say, there's loads of articles I've written about making big pictures, which go through in much more detail than I can here. But essentially, the bigger the print, the more impressive they are, but it also shows your photographic skills a lot more. If you have got any focus issues, exposure issues, camera shake or anything like that, all of that is magnified with big images. Now, that's fair enough, you can address most of those, but there are a few other aspects which change with big prints, and in particular composition. How we see detail in prints changes. So I'll take this one here, which is rather a large view of the harbour in Cornwall. I can move this one up. In fact, I'll inlay it into the video so you can actually see it in a bit more detail than you can just me hanging it in front of the camera. Now, in looking at something like this, our perception of detail is completely different to a small print. It means that the overall structure of the image, in how you've composed it, is different when you know you're making a big print. It's not always possible to tell. However, what I would say is that you will find images that work great as an A4 picture, enlarge them up to A2, and they just don't work. Similarly, there are images that could look overly cluttered and crowded as a small print, but make them a big print. All that detail is much more visible. It becomes part of the image. So it works both ways. There are pictures which won't work big, and there are pictures which won't work when they're small, but work when they're big. This is part of experimenting. Having a decent sized screen to edit on and things like that helps, but it's partly experience. Look at pictures at different scales and see how they change, how you interact with them. It also varies on how we perceive focal lengths. So your lens choices may change somewhat when you're going to be making big prints. I do occasionally make 60-inch by 40-inch prints. That's huge. If I know I'm going to be doing it, I pay a lot more attention to the detail in taking the pictures and how I'm editing it to make sure I get optimum results in the camera to be able to work on. And for stuff like this, as far as I'm concerned, software like Lightroom is a non-starter. It's great as a raw converter, but for stuff like this, I'm afraid you need Photoshop. And in fact, this particular one here is a stitched image. I know some people are great fans of Lightroom. I've never liked its approach, probably because I've used Photoshop for too many years, and I think in layers, and I think of various attachment editing. Personal preferences, but don't buy into the fact that everyone tells you that Lightroom is so great. I've tried it, I was involved in its original beta program, I never liked it then, and nothing they've changed about it has really changed my mind. Sorry, that's just the way I do it. It doesn't mean you can't make great pictures using Lightroom, just I wouldn't start there. But anyway, it always comes back down to, does the picture look okay? Now, have a look at some of the other articles and things I've done. Hopefully they'll be of some interest. I said there are some more detailed worked examples, particularly using things like Topaz Gigapixel AI, which is a superb bit of software which enables me to take an image like this with lots of fine detail and enlarge it even bigger and give real detail in it. But as I say, have a look at those and have fun making big prints. Thank you.